Welcome back to GearWire.com, and welcome back to our look at the Focusrite VoiceMaster Pro, part of the Platinum series from Focusrite. So it's part of their budget-friendly vocal processors. I'm Owen O'Malley, your budget-friendly GearWire presenter. We took a look at a few of the modules on here. We took a look at the options that are on the Class A preamp. And we also looked at the dynamics processing on this guy. Let's look at some of the tone shaping options we have now. The vintage harmonics, the tube sound, and also the voice-optimized EQ and de-esser. Something I could use right now, a de-esser. Okay, let's take a closer look. So now we're looking at all of our tone enhancing or shaping modules on the VoiceMaster Pro. The first module right here is called Vintage Harmonics. Now, vintage harmonics you might think would be sort of a tube emulation. This is a solid-state unit. There is a tube sound module. This is not it. Vintage harmonics is a really specific process. I'm going to read you from the manual. It emulates this really specific Dolby tape noise reduction effect that was, well, here, let me just read what's called a historical footnote. Many tape machines came with Dolby noise reduction units, which compressed the signal into the quiet region of the tape track. During playback, the Dolby would then expand the signal back to its original dynamic range. Some enterprising producers and engineers found that if the vocals were recorded with the Dolby unit switched on, compression applied relative to frequency, but were then played back with Dolby unit switched off, with no expansion, a pleasing emphasis was added to the source material. So it's basically emulating that very specific Dolby noise reduction trick. That's sort of like reverse trick. Let's hear what it sounds like. Oh, hello. So you can already hear the sort of high-end emphasis both in the background noise and in my the sort of sibilance of my voice. Basically, the vintage harmonics section takes applies this process to two different bandwidths. Which basically you're seeing the 6-segment LEDs reading back your gain boost for each of those two bandwidths. Here's both of them, sort of a threshold of them down. It is sort of like a dynamically based process, so they call it threshold. If we bring the threshold up on the high band, okay, you can hear blah, 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 blah. Hello, high band compression. It gives a little bit more excitement to the high end of that frequency spectrum. If we do mid-band here, hello mid-band, you can hear sort of what the effect does. It's an interesting effect, an interesting alternative to a sort of tube saturation sound. It sounds really good on bass. It sounds really good on sort of picked bass specifically. We'll get back to that later. You can put it post-compressor, being that it is dynamically a dynamic effect, so you can have it sort of interact with your signal after the compressor or before the compressor. It's before the compressor right now. And there's also a depth button, hello, which just, it brings the process way farther down into the frequency spectrum, into that sort of mid-range frequency. Hello. Yes. Okay, moving on. Let's take that out. Now, if you are looking for tube sound, go to the tube sound module. Very cleverly named. Let's bring it in. Hello. So now there's two very simple controls on the tube sound. There is tone, which just goes from mellow to, what is it called? Mellow to bright. Here's mellow. Here's bright. Hello, hello, hello. Here's mellow. Here's bright. Very, very subtle. Now let's bring in tube saturation. If we pump it up, you can hear a little bit. So some of that sort of like tube-like harmonic content is increased. Hello, tube-like harmonic content. Hi, hi, hi. It just makes the sound a little bit hotter. If we bring tube saturation all the way up, tone all the way down, we get this sort of very kind of classic, almost sort of old-school sounding tube tone. A nice little sort of tone toy to play with before we get to the voice-optimized EQ, which is what we'll move on to now. Let's bring tube sound out of there. Okay, here's our voice-optimized EQ. The controls on here are specifically tailored to sections of the vocal frequency that are, you'd normally have to sort of, if you're using a parametric or semi-parametric EQ or a graphic EQ, you'd have to sort of know what the specific frequency range was of certain characteristics of the human voice, like breath, presence, resonance, articulators. This basically just labels each of those sections as what they are, how they, what characteristic of the human voice they are. Up at the top here, we've got something called breath. So if we pump this up, if we pump up breath, you'll hear just quite a bit more sort of air in the sound here. Hello. If we take it out, there's just less. There's just no enhancement. Let's boost it, or rather, there's a frequency shift to bring it a little bit higher, so you can hear how that frequency shift affects sibilance and articulation, as well as the sort of air in the sound. All right, let's bring that out. Then we've got a couple of sort of mid-rangey controls here. This one is called, this one's just called mid, and the specific frequency it's at is 1K3. So that's really at the sort of bottom of the articulator range for the human voice. It's very pinpoint voiced here, this little control, and it's just a boost at 1K3. So here it's all the way out. It is center detented right here, so here's no effect at all. And if we bring it up, here you can hear it's sort of like nasally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you really boost it, you get that sort of like, it's almost like a telephone range. It's really the bottom of the articulator. And here's the top of the articulator right here. It's called ambience, and it's at 3K9. Here's all of it out, and here's all of it up. So a little bit more, a subtler of a control, at least for my voice. For female voice, it would probably have even more of an impact. Typically the female articulator is a little bit higher than the male articulator. And down at the bottom here, we have warmth and tuning. Now, this is a sweepable notch boost or cut. Let's cut it first and sweep it. Here you can hear the sort of range of it, and you can hear already why they call it warmth. Let's boost it, and here it's at the bottom of its range, and here it's at the top of its range. So it's really, it affects that sort of like throaty sound. And it can also be used to cut to, boost the frequencies around it in a relative manner. Okay, so now the last module here is the de-esser. It's the same phase-canceling de-esser circuit found in the Focusrite ISA 430. So it's a really nice de-esser. And it's a very simple-to-use de-esser. Especially because it's got this little listen function. Let's engage the de-esser, and basically this listen button here allows you to monitor. It sends the side chain output of the de-esser into the main output of the unit. So basically, what you can listen for is you can kind of using the cut frequency knob here is focus in directly on what is being eliminated. So you can hear what you want to take out instead of listening to the whole signal to see how it's affected. So let's put listen in, and we'll try and focus in on the S-ing, the S frequency. Sammy Sosa. That sounds like it's it right about there. And here's our threshold is how much of the effect is being added. If we bring the threshold down, we can listen again to that. Sammy Sosa. And that's exactly how much is being taken out. Let's bring the effect out again. Sammy Sosa. You can hear it's pretty subtle, but it's nice. The listen function is a very, very nice function there. And then we've just got our master output. Now, if we engage everything, all the dynamics, check. If we engage everything that we've sort of been playing with, the EQ, the optical compression, the vintage harmonics, and we want to sort of hear our original signal, you just hit process bypass. And here's everything bypassed, and here's everything back in. Let's take out vintage harmonics. Let's take out the optical expander here and listen one more time. Okay, so now you can hear a little bit more of a subtle difference, but this is with the process bypassed. You can hear how harsh everything is, and now with a couple of the modules back in, we hear how it's sort of like, smooth out your vocal signal a little bit. It's a nice little A-B function. And then underneath here, we've got our direct monitoring. If you're using this as your audio interface, you're going to want to use these for your direct monitoring, or you can just use it even as just to hear the signal right at the unit here before it gets to your recording medium. That was the end of part 2 of our 2-part look, and so the end of our entire look at the VoiceMaster Pro from Focusrite. I'm Owen O'Malley. You've been watching GearWire.com. Thank you very much.